So when you was driving a bread route, did you pick the bread up at where they baked it? Oh. Because there was a place in Oklahoma City we used to drive by that made wonder, and that smell is just one of those things that just brings back those. The longer they talk, the less likely we are to get through our lesson, even 2 weeks in. About time to begin class this morning. Glad everybody braved the weather. I did. The bank don't have any big envelopes you could just borrow? All right. Let me start passing them. You guys ready? Probably ought to wait till everybody gets in here. Find a pocket for that.
Yes,
I need you to fill both of these up.
Okay, I'll try with one.
You'll just kind of pass it around. I'll tell them it's coming. There's Bob Beeler. You want this mic so you can just walk on up to your normal spot where you're supposed to be?
Hello, John. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How you doing? He does a great job there.
All right, as we begin class this morning, the Green Valley envelopes are being passed around. So if you have an extra $1 or $2 or 10 or 20, throw in that envelope, and that helps out our support for Green Valley Bible Camp, which there's probably one or two in here that's an alumni from Green Valley Bible Camp, aren't they, Bobby? Bobby would be an alumni. So, well, that's good. So we support Green Valley, and a lot of good work gets done there. Yes, ma'am.
There might be some in here who are not really familiar with Green Valley, where it's at and everything. Could you give us a little rundown on it?
Well, has anybody eaten at Montenay Chicken House?
20 years ago. Still there.
It's still there? If you get there, you've gone too far. It's just a little too far. Green Valley Bible Camp is a church camp we support up in Rogers, out by Montenay, and it's just back in the valley, and it's a beautiful place, and a lot of members here are alumni, and they've been counselors, and I'm not even sure when it started. 1965 or 4, back in that area, back in that time frame, and youth groups from all over 3-state area, I guess, or 4-state area, go there and are taught and uplifted, and they get to play and swim, and that goes to Wayne Carter. We leave Wayne in charge of the money. I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad it is not me.
John, I went to the first week that Green Valley was first opened up.
And Mark Cunningham went to the first week of Green Valley.
5. At 5 years old.
At 5 years old, so we don't want to date him any. At 5 years old, went to the first week at Green Valley Bible Camp in 1964 or 5. So it has a long history in the area, and it's a good work that we support and have been part of from the beginning. And I know Mark's been on the board for 40 for 40 years, And so it's just something we do, and you know, as parents, you get to go visit your kids up there and see what a great time they're having and see what they're learning. And they make lifetime friends and just get to share and have an opportunity to grow. And so we support that. All right, we're going to try to finish up lesson that we started last week. And then probably the next couple of weeks, I'll be right back up here trying to finish another one until it's Mike's turn again, or probably Bob. Bob is here. I told him he got to just step right up here and just take the lesson, and I could sit down and relax and let some of this sweat dry up on the back of my back from all the all the nerves. But so good to have everybody out this morning. Thank you for braving the weather. Everybody get a bulletin and follow the prayer lists and the activities going on in the bulletin, and so you can keep track of how things change or what's going on, or who we need to have on our prayer list as far as sick and having surgeries and all of those things that happen in a family that we can keep track of and promote the power of prayer. So, all right, last week we talked about being single-minded, what that meant, and how we started talking about how we do that and what it really means. And so God calls us to see Jesus in every place, at every moment, and turn away from the voices and pressures of the world and single-mindedly follow Him. Okay? We put our old self away through the death and blood of Jesus, and we're raised to walk as His children in this world. And so that's all familiar. That sounds familiar. That sounds doesn't even sound that difficult until you wake up in the morning and go to work, or wake up in the morning and go to school, and figure out how difficult that actually is in the world we live in. Now, Paul, he's just getting into Corinth, and obviously he's there for a single-minded purpose, to share the story of Jesus, and unsurprising, with Paul's ministry, he meets resistance. And we all meet some kind of resistance in our walk, and how we deal with that resistance, how we respond to that resistance, how we act in the face of that resistance really says something to the world about who we are, where our mindset is, how our focus is, and it was the same thing with Paul, and he's a good example, because he faced a lot of resistance in Corinth, not the snide remarks and the offhand things that we put up with, which is minor compared in the grand scheme of things. We're talking about abuse, secret plans, and even government complaints. The higher powers complained and just followed Paul everywhere he went. And yet, in the face of that resistance, real, honest resistance, he just devotes himself to lifting up Jesus. And so we can use that as an example. Anytime we meet resistance, and we will, if we do it right, we will. So we should meet resistance in our walk, in our ministry, in our personal ministry to those around us. We will meet resistance, but Paul devotes himself. I don't know that I've ever fully devoted myself to a task. Okay, I was a good student. I made straight A's. I didn't try. I wasn't interested in school. I didn't devote myself to my education. there are times in my life where I have devoted myself, I guess, to my profession, but not fully. I was not adamant is not a word, but I was not really focused on the education necessary for me to further my work. You know, I just was not. I didn't like traveling. In my profession, you had to travel for school, so I had to go to Florida a lot for school. Didn't enjoy it. Didn't devote myself to it. I just tolerated it, basically. I just tolerated it. So when I look back through my life, I don't. I never devoted myself to study. I never devoted myself to my family like I should have. And I don't know that any of us ever have, if you think about it. But it's something that we practice, you know, something that we find that is necessary and good and it's helpful and it's like practice. It just makes you better. It just makes you better. And so we find here that Paul devotes himself, is fully focused, single-minded, like what we're talking about, to Jesus, to lifting up Jesus, to preaching Jesus, to just exuding Jesus to those around him, and to try to share with the people he's dealing with that there's just one answer. There's just one way. It's Jesus. Jesus is the only answer. And so the example we have from Paul being single-minded should wake us up to the fact that we should be single-minded. And I know it's a difficult concept, but we're all in some way or another single-minded, because it's a self-preservation thing. We care more about ourselves generally than we do others. Not the way it should be, but it's just the way the world teaches us to be. It's our environment that we grow up in. It's just the way we're taught to be. It's the way that it's easier, I think. It's easier to take care of myself than it is to take care of somebody else. It's obviously more fulfilling. When I do something for myself, that's way better for me than, if I do something for one of them kids, that don't appreciate it and don't care and just expect it, and of course my youngest, he was like that, He deserved it because he was such a good kid, You need to treat me better because I've just been such a good kid. And I said, well, if you remember correctly, all those whippings you got, that kind of made you a good kid. So that's still on me, so that's all about me. And so it's easier to be self-serving. It's always been easier to be self-serving. Now, as you get older, you learn that, when you do something nice for your wife or your husband, that makes you feel good. And we're right back to it, If I do something for my wife, that makes me feel good. Here I am. I'm right back to me again. And it kind of just, it goes that way. So now we have to learn to devote ourselves to something different than ourselves. And yet, when it comes down to it, it is still for me. If I devote my life, as I've tried to do, to Christ and Him crucified, and sharing that message with those around me, my family and friends and my coworkers and the lady behind the desk at the supermarket or whatever. Obviously that's good for them. But obedience to God and His will in my life is good for me. So it always comes back to me. Okay, I can feel good about it. And yet, I don't need to be arrogant about it. And so, the devotion that we lay at God's feet, the single-minded call that we have, and this is a tall order, but our message is meant to be the very voice of God in the world. Okay? You don't have to raise your hand, sweetheart. You just spit it right out.
Paul was always single-minded, even if he was persecuting the Christians.
Absolutely.
He was single-minded.
And we talked about that last week a little bit. No, that's okay. You know, she said that Paul was always single-minded. He was always zealous, and he was always devoted. Even when he was persecuting the Christians, he did a really good job of it. You know, he put everything into it. Okay, and so that's important to remember because it's easy. And this is what we talked about last week. Is it's easy to be single-minded about a lot of different things. You know, we're going to be single-minded about this. We're going to be single-minded about that. We're going to be single-minded about that. And we're going to be single-minded about this, depending on where we are in our walk or just in our life. You know, like I talked about earlier in our education. You know, we can be single-minded about our education, where we want to go in our. My youngest son was like that. My oldest son, not so much. But my youngest son was really focused, and it surprised me because it's not something that I endeared him to him. It must have been his mama because it definitely wasn't me. But he knew where he wanted to go to college, what classes he needed to take to get to where he wanted to be as far as his career and where he wanted to go and do. And he knew his grade point average, and he knew all these things that you know parents are supposed to care about, but I couldn't care less. You know, I just get him through school, and he can do what he wants. Then that's all I had to do was pay. So very single-minded, and that's that's a huge example for me because I'm all over the place. I'm a squirrel. Yeah. Well, you guys have been in this class before. You know, I am all over the place, and so. Being single-minded is not something that comes easy when the subject of our single-mindedness is different than what we're used to. Okay? And so we need to be single-minded in our focus for lifting up Jesus, the very voice of God in the world. But we have to have a different world view. We have to have a different view of our world than the world has of itself, I guess. My view of the world doesn't feel different because it's my view of the world. And I worship and associate and fellowship with people that have the same view of the world that in basic concept that I do. And so we need to be careful in our single-mindedness as we focus on our view of the world, that we don't miss opportunities in the world based on our view of the world. Okay, and kind of what I mean by that is we're put in a position as Christians, when we go out into the world, okay, we're put in a position where we decide who's worthy of that message. Okay? We're in charge of deciding who's worthy of that message. Okay? Regardless of the opportunities that God puts in our way, whether it be a roadblock or a straight and easy road, I get to decide who's, I guess, worthy of hearing that message. Okay? Now, my example from the scriptures in Paul is everyone. Everyone is worthy. Everyone needs the message. Everyone in the world, regardless of how I see their outward appearance, deserves to hear the word. Now, I'm not in charge of what they do with the word after they hear it. That's a whole nother realm. But we need to be careful as we go through our lives, making decisions based on our I don't even know how to explain how. I try to think back about how I decide. Past experiences helps. If you've tried to share the gospel with just we'll just call it a portion of the society that we live in, regardless of what that society is, whether it's socioeconomic, or whether it's homeless, whether it's alcoholic, whether it's drug use, whether it's any of those things, and you've been rejected. It's going to be more difficult the next time you go to share the gospel with that. And we're just going to call it a group, because once you're rejected by one person that belongs to one group, you feel rejected by that group. Okay? And so it's a difficult thing to stay single-minded in the face of rejection. Okay? And so, and the deeper problem with that is it may just be perceived rejection. It may not be real rejection. It may just be your perception of how they received your message may come across as rejection, and then you just give up, or you just move on, or you just alienate that group of people from your single-minded message. And so we need to learn, and that's a difficult thing for me, but we need to learn to view our world and our opportunities in that world through our examples in the scriptures, through our examples of Jesus. Okay? Jesus never isolated any group of people, regardless, in any way. Paul spoke openly to all that would listen, okay, and didn't condemn those that didn't listen. Directly. And so Jesus must be lifted up. Okay? Our opportunities our perceived opportunities are few. Okay? Our opportunities are many.
John, I think Paul had an easier time to talk to people than we do today. He would go to a synagogue every city he went to. They already gathered to hear something teach. He would be asked to teach, or he would ask to teach.
Right.
And they would listen to what he had to say.
Right.
If you and I go next door and tell them we want to teach their class today, we're probably not going to get that same reception.
And that is true. Okay. But if they don't want to hear what we have to say, they're not going to stone us. Okay. and so yes, he did have a captive audience at times, but he also had they didn't want to hear that second part. That's right. They didn't want to hear anything contrary to what they already believed, and that's the problem that Paul faced, and that's the issue we face today in the world we live in.
Michael spoke at the Illumination Week for the Methodist Church.
And how'd that go?
Went very well.
Well, good. And so, does that sound okay? She said that Mike had spoken at a
Before Easter.
Illumination Week before Easter for the Methodist Church. Okay? That does not sound like something I would be comfortable with at all. Okay? Because on the surface, that sounds like a hostile audience. Not, physically hostile audience, but it doesn't sound like an audience that would be willing to hear what Mike had to say. Okay? And yet, he's with us today. So they didn't lynch him or anything. So it may have worked out well. And so that's, some of the things I'm talking about, our view of the world, okay? Our view of our brothers next door or our fellow citizens next door. We may isolate that group of people based on, what we believe. And that's an issue that's hard to come by. But it's something we need to learn. So Jesus needs to be lifted up. He needs to be our single-minded focus in our families even. I know we all have family members that are not interested in hearing about the church, that are not interested in hearing about Jesus, that are not interested in talking about anything related to, that even alludes to any kind of religion at all. We all have those family members, okay? And so that's a difficult situation to be single-minded to Jesus. But I don't need to force feed that to a sibling or a parent or a cousin or an uncle or what. That's not something that I need to force feed, okay? My single-minded focus should be on Jesus and Him crucified. And so they should see that in my life, how I live my life, how I raise my kids, how I treat my mom, how I treat those in public, how I talk about my coworkers, how all of those things. I don't need to force feed it. Some people need force fed. There's no doubt. Some people just need to be, some people in the church need to be coddled and force fed and spoon fed and focused upon constantly just to keep them anywhere near the path. Okay? And so that's the focus that we need to have as far as our worldview. We're not the only ones. I wasn't raised like you and you weren't raised like me. I can't force something on my neighbor that they don't want, that they don't understand, that they weren't raised to believe even. There's certain things that most of us in this room, just as far as a worldview, believe. Okay? I'm going to say most because I don't know everybody in this room, but I don't know that there's a flat earther in this room. Does everybody know what a flat earther is? There's a large group of the population of the world that believes that it's flat. Okay? They believe the world's flat. They're called flat earthers. I can't even grasp that, much less have a conversation with somebody that's how they believe. I don't know where that belief comes from. I don't, I've watched a little bit on the internet just out of curiosity. None of it makes any sense to me. It doesn't seem right, It doesn't seem logical. It doesn't. It just seems crazy. Okay? It just seems crazy. Flat earthers just seem crazy to me. Okay? That being said, Jesus and Him crucified sounds crazy to the world. Okay? It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't sound logical. That's not how they were raised. They don't understand it. And it just boggles their mind. Okay? And so that's the worldview that I want us to have. Not everybody thinks the same way we do. But we can live our lives as an example as to why we do believe what we believe without trying to force it on anybody. So, now Jesus needs to be lifted up in our homes. our families are the place where we learn or don't learn. To love, okay? And we've used this example in class before, and Mike's talked about it before. If you're talking to a person who had an abusive father, grew up in a home where the father was just to be feared, to be hated, to be avoided, to be just not a good thing. A father was not a good thing, okay? If you start talking about your heavenly Father, okay, their mind's picture, in their mind's eye, that's not a good thing, okay? That's not a loving thing. That's not a hopeful thing. That's not a generous thing. That's not a, it's none of those things, okay? And so we need to remember that. And it could be, it doesn't have to be your father. It could be any of those things. Family may not be a good thing. Your siblings may not be a good thing. And so we just need to realize that the world does not always conform to the little box that we have in our mind that the world should be, that I grew up in, okay? And we need to lift up our we just need to shine Christ in our workplace too. That's the place, I don't know, not everybody in this class, but those of us that are not retired yet, okay, that is the place that we spent the majority of our time. It's just the way it is. I generally spend, as far as focused on work, getting up to go to work, going to work, coming home from work, about 12 hours a day, 10 to 12 hours a day. Okay? And coming down from that or relaxing from that takes a little longer, you know. And so there's this, you know, and then I sleep 8 hours a day, and so I try. I don't always, but I try. That's what the doctors say. It's supposed to be good for you. So that's the excuse I use to try to sleep as much as I can. Okay? And so time goes by pretty fast as far as your influence anywhere else but work, or anywhere else but working home. And so our work ethic, our integrity, our honesty in work, it's a picture of how God has transformed us to be who we are. And so people take note of your allegiance, I guess. People take note of your allegiance, okay? They know what ball team you root for, you know. They know what college you root for. They know who you're allied with. You know, they know. And so our allegiance should be to God and Christ, because people listen to our words, they watch our behavior, and so it's our opportunity to showcase, you know, it's our opportunity to show the world, not tell the world, but just show the world Christ. That's our opportunity. At work, at home, in the way we live, the way we treat our waitress, the way we treat the person behind the checkout counter, or the you know, get your order wrong, or you out of gas, or whatever, you know, just any of those things.
John, they shouldn't be surprised when they find out that you go to church.
That's exactly right, and that's the problem. A lot of people are confused because they live in the world. They don't understand how you can be kind in a situation that the majority of the people they deal with would not be kind. In a situation where they themselves would not be kind, okay? And that's the power of our example in the life that we live as we single-mindedly focus on Christ. Okay? And it's something that we have to decide that we're going to be single-minded towards Christ, and we build on that. Okay? We all know that our life cannot be just focused on this pinpoint of Christ like this and ignore the world. Okay? We can't do that. Our life needs to grow from that focus, from that single-mindedness, and be our foundation that the world sees us standing on. Okay? And so, when we first started the class, we talked about being single-mindedness, but how we act at work and home, not how we act, how we are, okay, how we conduct ourselves, how we portray Christ in our lives should be a picture or a portrait of how God cares for the world. Okay? God loves His creation. And so God sent His Son. God sacrificed His Son. Okay? Not for just me and you, not for just the good people, not for just the moral people, not for just a certain ethnicity, not for a certain hemisphere, not for a certain... God sacrificed His Son for the world. It's that simple, okay?
He sees the potential in all of us.
Absolutely. And we, seeing through the eyes of our understanding of God and Christ, we should see everyone's potential. We shouldn't live our lives discounting anyone. And it goes back to what I talked about. We're in charge of who gets to hear the gospel. We're in charge. We're in charge of who gets to see the gospel. Okay? Because we live in a world where, I'm just going to call them religious celebrities. When they fall from grace in the public's eye, okay, that affects religion. That affects religion. And so, and you guys have all lived through the Jerry Falwells and the people that you know that were famous. We'll call them evangelists, but we'll just call them people who call themselves religious. And so that has a huge effect on our ability to share Christ. Okay? Because the world doesn't look at the good. The world will not focus on how good we behave. The world will not focus on what good we do. But the second you fall, the second you stumble, the second you have an accident, and I say accident because I always think about NASCAR. Any NASCAR fans in the room? Okay. And why are you a NASCAR fan? Because you're waiting for them to crash. You're waiting for the wreck. You're waiting for the pileup. You're waiting for the chaos and all that's going on. Okay? And so that's what the world's looking for in your life, to focus on that. And so it does not matter when in your history that it happened. That's exactly right. And so as we learn to be single-minded, we can't let that be a distraction either. Okay, we can't let something that happened in our past distract us from being single-minded on what Christ would have us to do. Olympic athletes is what we talked about when we first started class, about their focus, about their single-mindedness, how they dedicate their lives and sacrifice time, energy, money, and opportunities to give themselves completely to a single goal. Okay? Now, I had this discussion just last week, and why do they focus that much? Why would they spend 8, 10, 12 years of their life, of their adult life, running? We'll say the sprinters, the 100-yard dashers, whatever it's called, 100 meters, I don't know what it is. Anyway, runners, okay. Can anyone in this room name 5 runners from at any time in history? Maybe 2, 3. Carl Lewis is some of those guys.
Jim Ryan.
Okay. It wasn't for the fame, I can tell you that. It may have been for it wasn't for the money. How many professional runners that's a job? None. Okay. So we can't focus on what we're going to get from the time, the energy, the money that we spend on our focus and our devotion, okay? Because it's not about the fame or the money. But you will know that every Olympics, since the beginning of Olympics, has had runners. They've always had runners, okay? I don't have an understanding of that, because they're not going to get anything for it, so they're not doing it for what they're going to get. They're doing it for what they give to the audience, to the public, to themselves. And so that's how we should be with how we share the gospel. Not something we're going to get. Not any kind of fame or fortune that we're going to gain from all the work that we put into the work that we do for Jesus. Okay? We do it for the work's sake, and there is a reward. Okay? I don't think that's what Christ wanted us to focus on. I don't think he wanted us to focus on the reward. I think he wanted us to focus on the journey to that reward. And so God gives us the one truth to hold up before the world. Gives us one message to proclaim, and that's Jesus Christ and him crucified. He wants us to be single-minded in lifting up Jesus, and he wants Jesus to be the single desire of our heart. Okay? Our devotion. The thing that we long to talk about. The thing we long to, I don't know if it's, it's almost like you want God to be proud of the work you've done. Not just because he's proud, but you want him to be proud of the work that you've done. You want him to be proud of the life that you've lived. You want him to be proud of the difference that you made in his church. And you want him to be proud of the difference that he made in you. Okay? And so single-minded is not an easy thing on the surface. But it's definitely an attainable thing. And it's not something we have to do by ourselves. Okay? It's something we have all of this help to help us focus on how we should be. The one thing that I told my boys growing up, as far as single-mindedness went, they're little and they don't, necessarily listen to Dad that much. But I always told them, if you'll live your life without saying or doing anything that you wouldn't say or do in front of the preacher, you'll be all right, as far as just that part of it. And so if we just go through our lives without doing or saying anything we wouldn't do in front of the preacher, that'll help us build on being single-minded as we work our ways towards that end of that race. So, thank you so much for your comments and your attention. If you don't like the way I teach, you're welcome to teach. Bob. And if you come back